Welcome to the Pint of Beer Chef, a channel dedicated to the pint of three. Here you'll learn everything you need to know to brew like a pro. Okay, in this video we are going to be brewing in our pint of three, one of the mini kits, what we separated from a 40 pint Scottish export kit. You'll see in my last video I separated this into 4 jars, so we've got 4 10-pint kits here. These are highly concentrated malt extract kits, these ones that come in the tins. The 40 pinters are always very highly concentrated. Now you'll see that when I vacuum sealed these, you can see now the button no longer presses, it's vacuum sealed, and I always like to pop on a little removable use by label, and I just put on the name Scottish Export February 25. I usually give it just 6 months on the date myself, just so that I don't lose track, because when there's a few of these jars knocking about and of different types of brews and everything, you might lose track of the dates or lose track of what's actually in the jar. So it's quite handy. You know, I got a roll of them quite inexpensively from Amazon, so you know you might want to invest some of them if you go down this path. Now, when it comes to deciding what goes with these kits, when you buy a 40 pint kit, it's highly concentrated malt extract, and it requires, usually they'll say it requires 1 kilo of sugar, or brewing sugar, dextrose usually. Now the reason for that is the actual malt itself is sufficient to give the desired flavour profile, but it's not got enough fermentables in it to hit the required ABV. So if you don't add the additional sugar, you will fall short on the ABV, and it'll be quite low in alcohol volume. So the manufacturer of the kit will say put in 1 kilo of sugar, and that sugar is fully fermentable, and it will ferment out and it will increase the alcohol level in the brew. That's fine. Now your options going forward with this, when you come to divide this kit or use these brew kits, sugar is not your only option, and I'm going to very quickly try and go through your options so you can understand the thought process that I go through when I'm making a brew from one of these extract kits. And that is the differences are there's 3 essential differences, and that is you've got your sugar, which is, if you like, the basic level. Sugar is the least expensive, and it's fully fermentable, so it's 100% fermentable. It will all ferment out, and it will all convert to alcohol, and it will not affect the flavour profile of the beer at all. So sugar alone, I would probably say, is quite good for lagers or pilsners and that type of beer, where really you don't want to add body to the beer, and you don't want to add complexity to the flavour. You don't necessarily want to make it more malty. You want a clean, crisp finish. In that instance, I would say stick with the sugar just to hit the desired AVB. If of course the manufacturer says a 1 kilo bag for a 40 pint kit, we're just dividing that by 4. So when we divide the kit into 4, the actual 40 pint kit itself of the malt extract, we would likewise take a bag of sugar and divide that into 4 times 250 grams. So it'd work out perfectly for us. Now the next step up from sugar alone, the brewing sugar, is beer enhancer. Now the beer enhancer is a bit like a hybrid between sugar and dry malt extract, which is this. And the beer enhancer includes a bit of both. It includes a ratio of sugar and a ratio of malt extract. So with that instance, I would say the beer enhancer, it comes in 2 forms, and that is dry, like Richie's beer enhancer, a 1 kilo bag is dry format, like in this little bag of dry malt extract I've got there. You can get liquid variations of the beer enhancer as well. Cooper's do one, and Mangrove Jacks do one, and there will always be their liquid malt in the bags, and they will be either labelled enhancer number 1 or number 2. Number 1 is for all the light beers. Number 2 is all for the dark beers, brown ales and stouts. I wouldn't recommend going for the liquid variation in these, because it's harder to keep. And because it's fine if you're using it all in one go and you're actually brewing in a 40-pint bucket and that's your method, but because we'll always be separating these out, keeping the remainder of the dry malt extracts is much easier to keep. You can just fold the bag over and clip the top and it'll keep fine, whereas the liquid malts are more difficult to manage and make last and more time consuming. So I try and stay away from them when I can. So moving on from the beer extractors, not extractors, the beer enhancers, you have the dry malt extract, and that comes in liquid version as well. Of course, you can get liquid malt extract, dry malt extract, but as I've just said, try and stay away from the liquid variants because they're harder to keep. Now, when it comes to the dry malt extracts, you can get all different grades, as in light, super light if you like, medium, and this is to do with the colour. So as it goes to medium to dark and to very dark, the simple thing is just choose the dry malt extract that matches the colour of the beer you're brewing. So if you're brewing, like for example, this Scottish ale is a very light, it looks like a pale ale, then we'll stick to a light dry malt extract. Whereas if we were doing a stout, we'd go right up to a dark or maybe even a very dark dry malt extract. So that's the thought process when you come to choosing these are your options. But essentially, I don't brew that many lagers, to be honest. I don't brew that many lagers and pilsners. I tend to go for the whole range of ales and stouts. So in that instance, I like a more flavoursome type beer, and I don't really use sugar for anything. I would consider two options, and that will be either the dry malt extract or the dry beer enhancer. I would say they're your two options. And if you think that the essential difference between the sugar and these two variants is that the sugar is 100% fermentable and it will add to the ABV, the alcohol volume, but it won't affect the flavour at all. Whereas the dry malt extracts and the liquid malt extracts and a lighter touch, the beer enhancers, they will actually change the flavour profile of the beer. Now, the common idea here is that they're going to improve it. They're going to make it better because really it's a cost-cutting exercise that these sort of manufacturers will put as little malt in the kits as what they can. Now, these are the cheaper ones. You can get more expensive ones that come with a lot more malt, and you don't actually have to add these extra fermentables to them at all. So, that's really kind of what you're looking for. The dry malt extracts are going to improve the flavour, improve the body of the beer, give it more complexity, as well as push up the ABV to the target. So I prefer these over the sugar. They're a little bit more expensive, but I think it's worth the extra money to get a better result. And what we're dealing with here, you still get a very good value for money product at the end of it all. So what I've decided to go for today, this was not specifically chosen for this brew. It just happens that I already had this. So this is this is actually a hot light dry malt extract. So it's not only a dry malt extract in the light variation, because this is a light beer, but this is actually it's hot. So it's actually got dry hops in it as well. So it will create a more hoppy beer. Now, as I say, you might not want that. You might not necessarily want that. This is made by Muntons, by the way. You might not want that hoppiness. I like hoppy beers, and so I've got nothing to lose with this, to be honest. I've never done this Scottish export before, and using this light variation of the dry malt extract, I'm going to put 250 grams of this in, and I think it will turn out fine. And if it's a little bit extra hoppy because of the hopped variation, then for me that'll go down nicely. It's not going to be an issue. So that's where we're at. If you've got any questions on choices when it comes to sugar, dry malt, I mean, really, I could probably do a video where I can take more time to explain these through. But I would say, to make a very long story short, I generally would consider two options: the dry malt extract or the beer enhancer, which is dry and powdered as well. The beer enhancer will be a lighter touch. It will affect the flavour less. The dry malt extract will give it more mouthfeel, create more body in the beer, enhance the flavour somewhat as well. and it will change the flavour profile more considerably than the beer enhancer. So they're the two. What I would actually recommend is, play around with all these things. You've got the measurement, go for 250 grams for a 10-pint mix, play around with them all. I mean, that's a great thing. You can take one beer and produce it in multiple different fashions just by changing the type of malt extract, sugar, or beer enhancer that you use. So that's all part of the fun. So I would encourage that experimentation, and always bear in mind as well that everybody's got a different appetite for beer. They've got a different everybody's sweet spot, or what they like in a beer is unique and individual to them. One guy loves a certain type of beer, and another guy likes something totally different. So that's why it's important to experiment and not really sort of like follow anybody 100%, because you're not necessarily going to be sort of like wired to enjoy the same beers as them anyway. So anyway, that's hopefully sort of like summarise that, quick enough for you. So I'll press on with this. Today I'm going to be using 5.5 litres, which I always use in my pinter. I mostly use spring water, bottled spring water in my pinter. I've run out of spring water today, so all I've done is nipped down to my local co-op and got some natural mineral water. I don't have spring water. I've used mineral water and spring water. That's what I do all my brewing with, and it comes out with excellent results. The spring water, the essential differences between mineral water and spring water is spring water, it has more calcium generally, so it's slightly harder than mineral water. Although mineral waters, most of them, some of them are soft, but most of them are not soft anyway. The difference really being that extra calcium that is in the spring water, it accentuates bitterness in beers. So it's probably spring water, and a higher calcium level is said to suit like the strong double IPAs, the stouts, the bitters, the brown ales. It's the higher calcium is said to suit that type of beer better. And then the lower calcium levels that don't accentuate the bitter so much tend to suit the pale ales and the lagers more. Now, the lagers require, ideally, the lagers are the other end of the scale. Like I say, I don't do too many lagers, but you can get Tesco's Ashbeck mineral water, which is soft, and that's ideal for lagers. But I'll be honest, I don't do that many lagers, and when I do, if you do them in just a mineral water that you'll pick down in a local shop, any variation pretty much, you'll get a great result on your lager anyway. The only reason why I don't go to Tesco and buy the Ashbeck when I'm doing a lager is because I don't have a Tesco local to me, and I literally just can't be bothered to go out and find one and buy it. That's why. And the results, what I get from this is I'm more than happy. If you try a spring water and you find that the bitterness in your ales that you're doing is a little bit too much for your liking, then it might be worth trying to step back to a mineral water with a lower calcium content, and that will sort of like step it away from the bitterness a little bit, and it might suit your palate a little bit better. Of course, if you're using tap water and you're happy with using tap water, then I would just say leave your tap water out probably for 24 hours, just to let it reach room temperature before you start dealing with it. This is for the pinter specific I'm talking about. We're going to be warming the water today anyway. So I think if you're using the tap water, I would recommend that you treat the tap water. There's various different treatments. Campden tablets, you might crush them down. There's a few variations out there if you just search for them to get rid of the chlorine and the chloramine from your tap water. I prefer to use a bottled water. I think it gives a better result. But so every brew that I do in the pinter consists of 5.5 litres basically. So that's what I'll be using today. So I will just get this organised in my mind now. You can see that there's quite a lot of stuff sort of like lined up here, but we're going to work through it pretty easily and swiftly, hopefully. So it's not going to be too much of a problem. Now, the first thing I'm going to start with is this half litre bottle. I'm just going to put that in the pan and get that out of the way. Now I'm going to put 1 litre from this into my kettle and get it warming up, or about 1 litre anyway, because we'll need this to rinse the jar out. Pop that in my empty kettle. Okay. I'll get that warming up. I don't really want that boiling. I just want it warm enough to rinse that jar out. And then what I'm going to do is take this down to about the halfway mark, pour it into the pan. I'm going to leave half of that for later. That'll do. Right, I'll just wait for that kettle to warm up. Now, I'm going to warm this jar up so that we can get the extract from it a little bit more efficiently. I don't want to pour hot water in that jar and risk cracking it. So what I'm going to do is do it in 2 phases. I'm going to go to my tap and get some warm water, fill it about halfway. Actually, I mean, I put the jar in there because I don't really want it coming over the jar. Not that it would matter, but I want it really just up to the top of the liquid. So I'm going to go into my tap there and pour warm water, quite warm, but not super hot. And I'm going to leave that standing for 5 minutes to warm the jar up. And then I'm going to go back to the tap and I'm going to get some hotter water and give it a second go, where the temperature of this then will be, heated up to the temperature of hot tap water. And at that point, we'll be ready to pour. So just give me 2 minutes to get some water in here, get this heated up, get this kettle nearly boiled, then I'll turn that off and just let it stand. And then I'll pop the camera back on and we'll move on to the next stage. Okay, so I'll tell you where we're at. I have weighed off the yeast. This yeast packet was 11.5 grams. This will be sufficient to do 2 batches. I don't know if you can remember, but when I told you when I bought the 40 pint kit, there was 1 packet of yeast that came with it. And I ordered an extra additional packet of yeast to go alongside it. I ordered, this is called WHC Labs ale yeast. They call it saturated ale yeast. It's not saturated, literally wet. That's kind of like the name of it. But there's lots of variations for ale, so it's not essential which one you buy. Just buy something that looks, okay. So this has been weighed off into 5.5 grams. That's sufficient. Normally I would go, for yeast as a general rule, I'd go 1 gram per litre. So if I was doing a 6 litre pinter kit, I'd put a 6 gram packet of yeast in, or 6 grams of yeast. Most of the pinter kits, I think, are 6 or 7 grams, but 5.5 grams is going to be more than sufficient. It's not too little. It's enough to get the job done. And that will mean that we can divide them 2 packets into 4. So 11 divided by 2 is 5.5. So that's what I'm going to run with. I've had this now soaking. Like I said, I started off with warmer water, then I tipped that out when the jar was warm, and then I put hotter water in it. Only tap water though, not boiling. So this is hot tap water that the actual jar is sitting in now. I've weighed off 250 grams of the dry malt extract, and then I cut the bag in half, rolled it over and clipped it. I use these little clips, just steam clips. That'll keep fine now till my next batch. So the dry malt is ready to go in. I've got the water heating up. It is just hitting 80 degrees now, which is my target temperature. The kettle, I didn't bring it up quite to a boil. I just put that litre in and I heated it up until it was hot to rinse the jar out, but not boiling hot. So I'm going for a target temperature of 80 degrees C. 80 degrees C is not sufficient to kill every bacteria known to man, but it is sufficient to kill every bacteria known to be a threat to brewing. So 80 is the temperature, really, an ideal temperature that you want to get to when you're preparing and mixing these things. As long as you get to 80, you know that the actual saucepan is sanitized at 80 degrees, so you don't have to pre-sanitize it. You can just wash it and dry it as usual. You know that the spoon that you put in, even though I've got my spoon sitting in sanitizer, it will be sanitized when it touches it in here anyway. And everything that goes in here will be sanitized just by the temperature of the water. So it's a great way to start and to get all this mixed up. And then we only have to worry about sanitization and the risk of infection when we cool the temperature down just before we transfer it into the pinter, which is going to be easy work, no problem at all. So it's just approaching 80 now. I'm going to leave the flame on. I'm just going to turn it down very low. So we'll probably hover hover around that heater, just in case it takes me a while. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I like to put half a teaspoon of yeast nutrient in. I buy this from Amazon. You can use any brewing yeast nutrients. The Pint fresh press, they come with a shot of yeast nutrients already in them. I like to put a little bit of this in just as a safeguard. Really, it's not essential, but really this is just like a boost. It's a safety net. If you put half a teaspoon of yeast nutrient in, then it kicks off a fast fermentation and a vigorous fermentation, and it usually actually quickens fermentation. So usually a brew that's been boosted with yeast nutrient will kind of finish a little bit quicker than one that's not. What this has got in it is all the essential micronutrients that the yeast require to really thrive and multiply, and do a really efficient job. So it's not too expensive. I like to put this in. It's kind of optional. You'll probably have no problem at all without it. But for what it's worth, when I'm doing this, I think, well, I'll give it every little fighting chance I can to get the perfect result. So I'll pop that in and give it a stir. Just shake the excess off my spoon. Keep my eye on that temperature. It's just about 84 degrees now. I'm going to turn that off, because by the time I have done this, the temperature now will hold sufficiently well that I can do all this and not worry about that, to be honest. It's about 84. It's going to be well over what I require. Of course, at this temperature, it's very easy to dissolve these powders in. Weighed off 250 grams of the dry malt. Now I'm going to go for the dry malt first, get that mixed into the water thoroughly before I add the liquid malt. I'm just going to chuck that all in and get to work. Oh, it smells like Horlicks, to be honest. Okay, I'm happy with that. Take your time, make sure it's nicely dissolved, and there's no rush with this at all, so take your time and enjoy it. Okay, that'll do. I think we'll give it a shot now. It's warm enough. It's warm enough. It probably would do no harm if we used real hot water from the kettle, but I tend to just try and get away with tap water, to be honest. Of course, this vacuum seal now we will pop off. You can see that super sealed there, airtight. Just what we wanted. Right then, so we'll get this pouring out of there nicely. Not coming out too bad. I'll get the water here and give it a quick rinse. Give it one more rinse. We'll use up all this water, what we've put in the kettle, of course, because that's part of the mix, part of our 5.5 litres. And with the kit, These kits, of course, are condensed to a greater extent than what the pinter kits were. So where the pinter kits range between 0.7 litres and 1.2 litres, you know, these kits are probably more like 0.7 litres or maybe even only half a litre max. But anyway, you can see there that jar, the great thing about using these kilner jars is they just work perfectly for the job. You know, that jar now there, look, is beautifully, it's got a bit round down the edge, but apart from that it's clear. I'll just set the jar on the side there, let it cool down. Put that lid over there, so that's served as well. So, a couple of minutes stirring now. Just enjoy a leisurely stir. Okay, now I'll be honest, I mean, that's probably way more thoroughly stirred than what it needs. You know, it doesn't take long to stir that in, but it's just a moment that I enjoy it. You know, that's what brewing's all about. Standing over the pot, stirring it, smelling all that work coming up. Oh, I like it. Okay, so what you of course will remember is earlier on I kept half of this water back. Now the reason that I kept half of this water back is because we need to cool this now, and it's not really going to be a problem adding this now. You see, of course, it's going to immediately cool it down and do half the job for us. Not quite, it's not going to be down to room temperature where we want it, so it's not going to be sufficient to pitch the yeast straight away. But if we'd put all that in and dissolved it in, then of course it probably, I've got no cooling equipment, I don't invest in anything like that, I just leave it in a sink of cold water. So if I put all 6 litres in, 5.5 litres plus the pack, went up to 80, it probably, I'd have to leave it for 24 hours overnight for that to cool down to room temperature to enable me to put it in the pinter and pitch the yeast. So what we'll try, the reason why I keep half of this back is so I can accelerate that process. So I'm going to tip this in now, which will probably knock, I don't know, 20 or 30 degrees off this current temperature. Just pop that over there. Okay, so that's stage 1, if you like, complete. What I'm going to do now is go and get my lid, put my lid on top of the pot, half fill my sink with cold water, as cold as possible, set the saucepan in it and give it time to cool down to room temperature. Ideally, you know, we'd like to see a temperature between, I would say 20, 23 degrees would be great. But of course, you've got to bear in mind that on a warm day, sometimes the ambient room temperature might be 24 degrees or even 25. So there's no point in cooling it down to 20, 21, 22 if it's just going to go straight up anyway. So what I tend to go with is cool it down to room temperature, because that's the temperature that we're going to be fermenting at. So that's probably as best we're going to do. So, you know, I'll do what I've just said, pop the lid on, get the sink half filled, cold water, pop this in, and then I'll put the camera back on, just let you have a quick look at that. And then we'll take a break until this hits the ideal temperature for pitching the yeast. And then I'll move on to the transfer into the pinter and how I pitch the yeast. So catch you in a bit. So there you have it. It's in the sink now, cold water. This cold water will probably quite quickly, you know, start to warm up as it sort of like takes on the temperature from the pan. So I'll probably give it 30 minutes. Then I'll drain off that cold water, half fill the sink again with cold water again. I don't use ice packs and all stuff like that. You know, you can try and boost it with ice and stuff, but I'm not in a super rush. You know, for me, it's very difficult trying to cool these down. Like I say, you can buy professional equipment, cooling coils that you put in and run cold water or liquid glycol or liquid nitrogen through, or God knows what, all kinds of expensive stuff. But I don't get involved in any of that. You know, I like it. I like brewing to be simple, just pots and pans, and you know, just old school really. So, you know, all I do is put it in my sink, and even when I do my all grain brewing, I just put it in the sink in cold water. And because within the all grain brewing, I'll on the boil, I'll boil the whole water volume. Don't water it down like this. You get a better result not doing it, not adding half of the water after. With the kits, it's fine, but with the all grain, the whole volume will go in the pot. And cooling that down from, you know, if you like, the whole 10 pints from boiling point, you know, it'd just be such a ball's ache trying to cool that down at speed. It's just not worth the stress. I like to just put it in the sink, leave it overnight, come back down the next morning and pick it up, and of course it's at room temperature, ready to go. You know, saves me a headache. So I'll check on this every couple of hours now. I'll just pop a digital thermometer out. You must, this at this point now, the temperature that this is at, this is really a breeding ground for bacteria now. Now we're off the 80 degrees C. You know, now anything that touches that wort from this moment onwards needs to be sterilised. So I have got a digital thermometer that I'll pop in there every hour or so, and I just buy the little alcohol swabs. You know what you'd use on your skin, like if you had a cut or a graze or whatever, the medical type one. So I'll just always make sure that I clean that down with an alcohol swab before I check the temperature in there. And as soon as I see a temperature that's close to room temperature, I think today it's about 21 degrees, 22 degrees. So as soon as I see anywhere near that, 22, 23 degrees, then that's good enough for me. And then I'll pop the camera back on and I'll show you the transfer and pitching the yeast. So that you know, so it's nearly done now. You know, that was stage one, which was really the more considerable bit. You know, another thought. This is a bit of a random thought. I don't want to go on too long because I know I'll bore the life out of you. But you know, there's ideas with mixing the pinter. You know, really the pinter system is a shake and brew system in a sense. Bear in mind that the Pinter 3 is just a pressure fermenting vessel. You know, the idea of shaking it is Pinter specific, and that's because it's small enough that you can pick it up and shake it. But I find that shaking the brews, it does take a lot of work. You know, it's quite heavy. There's a lot of work. You can never be sure it's thoroughly shaked. So you've got to do probably way more work than is required. And the compact volume in there and the amount of water in there, you've not got that much room to shake anyway. And in truth, once you've got this kit and you start going down the path of doing extract kits, even if you never touched the all grain kits, if you buy yourself a big pan and a spoon and just the basic stuff to mix the extract kits and start splitting them out, in truth, it'd probably be more efficient and easier and get a better result to do your pint of fresh press in the same fashion. You know, you get your bottled water, 50% of your water into the pan, put your pint of fresh press into a jug with hot water, warm it up, pour it out easily, roll it out into the pan, stir it all up, then put your other 50% of the water in, just like what we've done, other 50% of the water in, put it in your sink, wait for it to cool, put it in your pinter, just shake it up then. That shake though is not so much about mixing it, because you've done all the thorough mixing, it's beautifully mixed in here. The final shake in the pinter, which you'll see with this, that's about aerating it, that's oxygenating it. That foam that you're trying to froth up then is to get oxygen in, because that's the only time that beer needs oxygen, right in the beginning, because the yeast needs that oxygen to go into fermentation. So in truth, if you've got this type of kit and you've come this far, if you're actually doing this and you're not just watching it, you'll probably find you get better results, and it will save you probably a heart attack shaking your pinter to actually, mix your fresh presses in this way. It's probably a superior way of doing it, to be honest. The idea of shake and brew reminds me of the old shake and vac. Shake and brew, it sounds good, but it does have its downfalls. It does have its pitfalls. It sounds super simple, but of course, if you follow the instructions on the app, A to B to C to D, and go through them, there's a lot of things that can trip you up. There's a lot of things that can trip you up there. But I can see the point is to make it sound super simple and encouraging to everybody. And I love the Pint of 3, but I think if you want to take a next step and take sort of like this approach and get into the extract kits and everything, I think you'd probably find yourself at some point in time treating the pint kits the same as all the beer kits. And this is kind of like the sort of way that you'd be handling these kits. But anyway, that's a thought for the future. I might knock up a video on that, actually, do a similar thing, without the dry malt extract, just the pint kit, and go through this. So yeah, anyway, I don't want to babble on because, of course, I'm trying not to stretch these videos out, trying to keep them compact so that I don't lose your interest. But sometimes I can't help but waffle. But so anyway, I'm gonna cut it there, and as soon as I get the temperature on this, I'll fire the camera back up and we'll move on to the next step, which should be a little bit of fun, easy stuff. So I'll catch you in a bit. Okay, it's 2 or 3 hours later now. It was quicker than I expected, to be honest. I changed the water probably every 40 minutes, something like that. Refresh the cold water, and the temperature is now down to 21.8 degrees C. So that's perfect. That's as good as I could have hoped for. So I'm going to pop this out of the sink, just drain off the cold water, flip the pinter over and put it in the sink ready. I think I'll reposition the camera, get it up above the sink so you can probably see it better. And then I'll proceed to show you the transfer and pitching the yeast. So I'll get that sorted now. See you in a sec. Okay, there you have it. It's all in place now. Pint is ready to go. The wort is sitting there in the pan, the ideal temperature. You'll see that in the sanitizer, I popped in this wide neck funnel. I don't know if you can remember, but I used this when I was separating the 40 pint beer kit. This is very handy just to stop spillage over the edges of the pinter when I'm pouring this in. So I've had this soaking in the sanitizer, just for 60 seconds. Just rinse it off shake it to the best of your ability. Pop it on top. And we're ready to go. Put the sanitizer out of the way now. I'll just going to give my hands a quick rinse because I've got that sanitizer now just sitting on them. I don't want to slip when I pick this big pot up and tip it everywhere. That would be the finale of the day, that would. So there you go, we're ready to go. Smells nice. It smells like toffee. I don't need to check for the fill line here because, of course, I already know the exact volume of water that I've been using. So it's going to be exactly what I need. That's it, no problem at all. Funnel off. Now this is where we're going to give it a good shake before we pitch the yeast. We're going to give it a good old shake up to aerate it, oxygenate it, get it ready for the yeast to go in there and start thriving. There you go, that's going to be more than enough. Now, just before I pitch this yeast, I want to take a quick sample off this. I don't always take hydrometer readings, to be honest. I mean, I prefer using the refractometer to a hydrometer, but I have actually bought a new refractometer that I'm in the process of calibrating to find the correction factor on a refractometer. It takes about 30 samples before you can sort of like hit the right correction factor. So I'm going through the process of calibrating that. But you do need a hydrometer reading to calibrate the refractometer. So in time, I'll switch to the refractometer only, because for the simplicity of only using a couple of drips. But being I've never done this before anyway, taking a gravity reading will probably be interesting. I'm just going to pour that first little bit away because it would have included some sanitizer that was in the tap. I don't like taking the hydro readings, to be honest, because I don't like wasting the beer. Most of the time, you know, I just I accept it's going to be there or thereabouts, you know, for what I need. I don't worry about it. But there are times when, you know, it is interesting to monitor these things. So I'll sort that out later. The hydro reading anyway. Hydro reading. I've got the sample there ready. Now, there's two things I'm going to say here. I'm going to obviously pitch the yeast and connect the docking station. Got the yeast ready over here. Weighed that off earlier. Now, one thing I'm going to do here, and I'm not suggesting that you actually get one of these, but today I'm going to pop a iSpindel in this so that I can monitor the fermentation. I'm going to put this into fermentation for 9 days. When it comes to, you know, choosing how long you ferment a beer in your pinter, of course, if you're doing a beer pack that you've broken down from a 40 pint pack, you know, it's just your best estimate. A simple thing to do is to look at the Pinter app and find a beer that's similar to the one that you're doing. So if you're doing a pale ale, find a pale ale in the Pinter app and select that beer. If you want to change the dates, of course, and add a couple of extra days, then just select custom in the app and add the extra couple of days. But one thing I would mention, which might be useful to you, is I've done an analysis of all the Pinter beers, you know, copy them all out, all the specification of them, put them into a spreadsheet, and putting the lagers aside, because I would consider lagers an outlier, really, because lagers always take longer than what the stouts, the bitters, and the ales do. So everything bar the lagers, when you take them all together and analyze them, the average fermentation days was 6 and the average conditioning days was 6. Now, when you take the median, which is the middle set point of all the data, the fermentation was 7 days and the conditioning was 7 days. So you've got an average of 6, a median of 7. Now, bearing in mind, I always add 2 days to the pinter recommended anyway. I opt to take the median, which is, I always take the longer one just to be safe, which is 7-7, and add 2 days to that, and that gives you 9-9. So what that tells you is, one thing I can say is going a couple of days over on fermentation is never going to be a problem. You know, if anything, it will improve the results. It will give you a better flavor profile and probably a better finish. It's when you rush and pull it off fermentation early and under ferment that you get an issue. So whilst the golden rule of mine is to add 2 days to the recommended pinter days on both the fermentation and the conditioning, if you want a real simplified rule, and this absolutely does work. I mean, I have 3 pinters running upstairs. This system has been tripped up because the pinter tap room, I had to bring 2 off at the same time. But I have 3 pinters running all the time, and I have 1 fermenting, 1 conditioning, and 1 tapping. And of course, every 9 days, that cycle works out beautifully well. So what I'm saying here is that if you ever brew anything in your pinter, except with the exception of lagers, if you go for a fermentation of 9 and a conditioning of 9, you can brew anything in your pinter with the times of 9-9. Now, what I would say is that, you know, I've tried that with anything and everything. It works brilliantly well. If you wanted to stick with that and not even look at the Pinter app again, and you went with 9-9, you'd have a fantastic result with everything. Except lagers, they take a bit longer. So the simple rule with lagers is, I would say, step it up to 12-12. So you've got 9-9 for ales or other lagers, 12-12. Now, the only exception to that rule is, I find, is a lot of the ales, whilst they will probably be at their peak and at their best after 9 days conditioning, and generally through conditioning, the flavour improves. But what I would say is a lot of them are going to be more than satisfactory after 7 days. And I almost without exception start taste testing 7 days on. And most of the time, I'm more than happy with that result after 7 days, and it's drinkable. So with lagers, I would extend that, you know, to probably 2 days extra, 9 days. So to summarize what I'm saying here, you can brew anything other than lager in your pinter, any beer kit, any style of beer, with the fermentation days at 9 and the conditioning days at 7. Start taste testing at 7, and if it's not how you would like it, then give it another 2 days to 9-9. And with lager, you could go for 12-12 or go for 12-10. You know, 10 on the conditioning would probably be the point that I would start taste testing, ideally, on a lager. So using them simple guidelines there, really, you know, you can, if you've got any unknown brew and you're not sure about timings, just go for 9-9 or 9-7. Start taste testing after 7 on the conditioning. But if you want to play it safe, just go 9-9. Simple as that. You know, then you can't go wrong. If you don't want to start taste testing after 7 and you've got the time to wait, time to spare, you're not in a rush, then quite simply, you can brew anything you like in your pinter. 9 days fermentation, 9 days conditioning. You can brew any lager in your pinter for 12 days fermentation, 12 days conditioning. You know, if you want just 2 simple rules that are not going to get any simpler than that, then that's what you can abide by. You know, a lot of the time with my system, because it runs on a 9-day interval, I let them, I will, for example, I will, whether this was ready in 7 days or not, I will give it 9 days in fermentation, because it's going to suit me. I've got pinters up there that are in fermentation, that they're in conditioning, that they were in tapping, and of course I need to drink them and move the chain along. So I'm in no rush. I'm in no rush for this. So I don't really need to get it the day it's ready. You know, I can wait, and I'm only going to get sort of like a better result because of that. Now, just out of interest, this iSpindel, this is brand new. I'm going to pop this in because this will be able to communicate by Wi-Fi. I've hooked this up with brewspy.com, and this will basically go into the pinter, and it will every 15 minutes take a reading of the works inside here, and it will send a signal down the Wi-Fi to BrewSpy, which will log the details for me, and I will be able to see this because I've not done this before. I'll be able to see it. If all goes well, I'll be able to track it and see the brewing timeline for it and see when it's fully brewed. So that could be quite interesting. This iSpindel does give gravity readings as well, but I couldn't be sure and wouldn't bank on them being accurate and true. Like I say, this is a brand new unit. I've never used this before. Today's really a tester to make sure it's watertight and it's going to work okay. So what I'm going to do before I pitch the yeast in this is turn this on. It's fully charged. I'm going to pop it in the sanitizer. This is going to be able to do 2 things for me. Popping that in the sanitizer is going to let me know that it's watertight. and of course it's going to sanitize it. If you've got any interest in iSpindels and what they can do, then I'll do another video on it for you one day, maybe with a bit more detail. But I'm not suggesting that you buy one of these. And to be honest, I'm not really tech heavy. I try and stay away from the tech associated with these things. I try and keep it simple. And I'm actually 9 out of 10 times more than happy to just stick with the estimated brewing days. The brewing days that Pint to give +2 has worked so well for me in the whole Pinter range. And as I've just said, anything outside the Pinter range, if you go 9.9, you're guaranteed a winner. And if you go for a lager, go 12.12, you're guaranteed a winner. So you don't need these type of things, but it's just out of interest. It's just out of interest. I'll put a link in the comments, in the notes, if you like, of where I got this from. It wasn't too expensive. This guy Neil Catley, I think his name was Neil. He made this. He makes these and supplies them. He calibrates them. He pre-calibrates them. So when you get it out the box, basically it's ready to go. You don't have to soft calibrate it, which is kind of like a bit of a balls ache. So it's good. It was good value for money. I think he'll probably charge about £35-40 for one of these, including post and pack. I mean, I'll put his email in the comments, and if you've got any interest in experimenting with one of these, then drop him an email and see what you think. So anyway, that's I'm just going to have a quick look at this to make sure that no water has got inside it. There's no actual rubber seals on these or anything, so it's surprising that the water doesn't get in. The cap literally just screws down on the top and pushes against the lid, pushes against the framework, pushes against the lid sufficiently that it makes it waterproof. So my fingertips should be sanitized there. So I'm just going to pick this out with my fingers, and that now should be nicely sanitized as well. So let's go for pitching. Pretty much the perfect temperature for pitching this yeast. I'm just going to check the carbonation valve on that. You can see what I've done there. You can see what I've done there. Left the carbonation valve on 0 from where I put the tap out. That's exactly what I warned you not to do. Do you remember I said every time that you put the carbonation valve into the off position, by default, always remember to put it into number 5 before you move on, as a matter of course. And this is exactly why I came to learn that lesson, because I've just flipped this up, turned the carbonation valve to off, took my sample, not put it back to 5, and it started trickling out. Luckily, it was only a very light trickle, and when I undone the lid, of course, and the air got in, that's when it sort of like went to town a bit. So I'll just give this a quick wipe. But there you go. I don't want you to think that everything goes perfect. These are the sort of dilemmas that we can have. And of course, these are what we're trying to practice to avoid. Practice makes perfect. But of course, I'm not going to cry over that. A little bit of spilt beer when I've got a big barrel of it there. And there you go. In goes the yeast. In goes the ice spindle. That would have been funny. That would have been funny if I put the docking station on without the lid. There we go. Safety at last. Right, I'm just going to pop that over straight away so that the ice spindle settles in the right position. Okay, that looks all good to go. Right, there's just one other little thing that I'll do. I'll just go and pick something up and I'll pop the camera back on and just show you that to finalise this video. So I'll be back in 1 second. Okay, I'm back. All I went to get is, generally speaking now, I tend not to use the Pint app, to be honest. I think it's easier just to do my brews how I like them, whether they're pints or not. And I just bought one of these calendars, you know, where you can take 1 day at a time and pull the sticker off. So I'll just take this brew now. I've just created it today. So I'll just count 9 days, which is what I intend to ferment this on. 3rd of September, I'll write down Scottish export. I use one of my use by stickers and just pop it to the top. So then I can just use that as a reference when I need to put it into conditioning. So that's it. That is the conclusion of today's video. You know, the yeast is in there now. I will go and check the ice spindle to see if I'm getting some data off that. It might be interesting to you just to see the graph and see the progress. That's if it works. You know, you can't put anything past technology. It might not do anything. It might just flood. It might just flood with beer and ruin the brew. That's the other alternative. But anyway, hopefully not. I think it'll be okay. You know, so that's today's session concluded. You know, it was a pretty good day. Hopefully it'll be useful to you, and you'll have a little crack at it yourself and see how it goes. Coming up on my next video will be the taste testing the George's pills. So we'll do the official taste test on that. And I have modified a chocolate stout all grain recipe, which I have ordered. So it's in the post. So I think that's going to be the video after. So we'll get the George's taste test out the way. I've got the Pinter Big Mouth remixed coming up. I think that's actually that's only just going into conditioning. So I think there'll be a couple of videos before that. I think basically I'm going to stick with the George's taste test. That'll come good. And then I'll probably just do the all grain recipe, which is quite similar-ish, to be honest, than to what we've done today. But the chocolate stout all grain, you know, should be an interesting one. So I think we'll have a crack at that. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at the price, how much it cost for a complete all grain kit. I think you'll be shocked, to be honest. So I'll show you that. I put the recipe together in an official format so that the malt miller would review it, and if it gets by their reviewing process, they're happy with it, then they will publish it on their website, which means I'll be able to just drop you a link in the text, in the introductory text, and if you wanted to sort of like have a crack at it yourself, you can just click on the link and it will take you straight to my recipe on the malt miller, and you'll be able to just hit add to basket and it will add all the malts, you know, the hops and the yeast, the whole lot, and malt miller will freshly prepare it for you, put all the malts in one bag and box it all up and send the whole kit So that'd be good if you want to have a shot. If you don't, if you just want to watch me do it, that's fine. But for the future, if you ever get sort of like into the extract kits and the all grain, then having instant access to 10-pint recipes is not going to do you any harm. So that's what we've got coming up. I think I'll just stay focused on that. Otherwise, I'll just get distracted. I think we'll just get in that taste test, get the all grain recipe in, get that done while it's still fresh. The all grain, the malts, the malted grains, best to use as soon as you can really. Once you've ordered the kit, once you've ordered the recipe, get it brewed, get it done. So I think that's it for now. I'll stay focused on that. And then of course, I've got a backlog of stuff brewing. So there'll be a good few taste tests in. We'll get the leaderboard back out and see how some of these alternatives, fare against the pinter packs. I've still got a few pinter packs upstairs that I need to run through. And of course, I've tried most of the pinter beers, but I'll redo them all so we can get them on the leaderboard and see where they position. So, there's plenty lined up. You've seen today, that little trip up there at the end where I left the valve open. You'll see that it's probably not going to surprise you, but I don't script these videos. I don't rehearse them. I literally just come in here, switch the camera on and do what happens. Basically I'm just doing what I do anyway, but putting a camera behind me. And what you've seen there, I made a mistake. I left the carbonation valve open in the off position, of course, when I took that sample, and then it started to spill over the side. Hiccups like that, they do happen, but they're not tragic. They happen to everybody. But of course, the more you do it, the more refine it. If you can train yourself to shut that valve off to number 5 every time you touch it, that's what I'm trying to do, because surprise, surprise, that's not the first time I've left that open. That's why I've mentioned it in the past. You learn from your mistakes. And I can't tell you the amount of times that I've left that valve in the off position, poured my beer kit in there, only see beer trickling out the bottom, or sanitizer. Of course, it doesn't matter so much with sanitizer, but for the trickle of the beer, you lose. I mean, it's not a tragedy, but it's all part of the learning curve, getting yourself to remember these things and refine your technique. So that's it for today anyway. Some good stuff coming up there. I think it will keep us interested, and I will catch you on the next one. Cheers. I hope you enjoyed your video today. If you'd like to join our Pinter community, like and subscribe and leave any comments below. Cheers.